State funerals give countries the chance to mourn the passing of a national leader, and often mark the end of an era, but they also give a country a chance to show off their national pageantry, and invite other world leaders to attend the ceremony. And perhaps no state funeral had more geopolitical significance than the funeral of Josip Broz Tito, leader of communist Yugoslavia. Josip Broz Tito led the communist resistance against the Axis powers in World War II in Yugoslavia. After the end of the war, Tito transformed the former Kingdom of Yugoslavia into a communist state. During his rule, Tito was able to keep the ethnically diverse and fractious nation of Yugoslavia together through a mix of reforms and authoritarianism, being named president for life. In fact, there's a famous joke about Tito. Tito was apparently eating steak with the American ambassador, but apparently no one had given Tito a steak knife. So Tito looked around saying, "Knife, knife," and then his chief of security looks up from his plate and asks, "Who?" During the Cold War, Yugoslavia occupied a unique position. It was a communist state, but since it liberated itself after World War II, it remained unoccupied by the Soviet Union, unlike the rest of Eastern Europe. And so Yugoslavia would go on to forge its own path, independent of the Soviet Union, and was not a member of the Soviet-led military alliance, the Warsaw Pact. In fact, after 1948, Yugoslavia would be quite hostile to the Soviet Union, and would even receive financial aid from the United States. As a nation not strictly aligned with either of the Cold War superpowers, Yugoslavia was able to have good relations with countries on both sides of the Iron Curtain, and even became a founding member of the Non-Aligned Movement, an organization which aimed to guard its members' independence from interference from either side of the Cold War, with Tito becoming the first Secretary General of the Non-Aligned Movement. So when Tito died in 1980, it was a monumental moment in Yugoslav history, as Yugoslavia lost its main unifying force, and after ruling for 35 years, many Yugoslavs had only known life under Tito. People openly wept at the news, football games were stopped, and 700,000 Yugoslavs would attend Tito's funeral. But Tito's funeral is interesting for another reason. It was basically a microcosm of the Cold War. Because Yugoslavia was a non-aligned country and had good relations with most other countries, Tito's funeral would become one of the largest and most attended state funerals in history, with 128 countries of the 154 UN members at the time sending representatives, including 4 kings, 31 presidents, 6 princes, and 22 prime ministers. But with so many leaders from countries all around the world attending, this created some unique problems and awkward diplomatic moments. Both the Soviets and the Chinese communists sent delegations, but relations between the two were very poor after the Sino-Soviet split of the early 1960s. And so while the Soviet leader, Leonid Brezhnev, attended, he took great steps to avoid meeting or being seen with the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party. Brezhnev himself by this point was also in declining health and would be dead within 2 years. While the leaders of most major countries attended, there was one notable exception. US President Jimmy Carter chose not to attend. One possible reason for Carter's absence is that Carter didn't want to be seen with the Soviet leader Brezhnev, especially during an election cycle, after the Soviets had invaded Afghanistan the previous year. This invasion ended the fairly stable relations between the two superpowers that had existed for much of the 1970s, a period of time commonly referred to as détente. Instead, Carter would send Vice President Walter Mondale and even his own mother, Lillian Carter, to head the American delegation to the funeral. Carter's absence was criticized by some, including Republican presidential candidate George Herbert Walker Bush, and so Carter would visit Tito's grave only a month later. Tito's death would mark a turning point for Yugoslavia, as the country would collapse into separate republics a decade later, following the brutal Yugoslav wars, and the region would lose much of its geopolitical importance following Yugoslavia's breakup and the end of the Cold War. But for a short time, the leaders of the world would come together in Yugoslavia at a time when the world was so starkly divided. I hope you enjoyed this video and thanks for watching. If you'd like to see more from Newsreel History and help more content get made, please consider subscribing and I'll see you next time.